Welcome to the Central Valley Writers Workshop. Our valley is home to a wonderful group of authors and writers, as well as many aspiring writers, all of whom are looking for tips, tools, and techniques to improve their writing skills. I'm your host, Claudia Newcorn, author of the award-winning Chrysalis Chronicles of Fairy, magazine editor, and Modesto Bee community columnist. Today, as our guest, we have with us Kim Nicholson, author of Beneath Archer's Tree. Kim has a wonderful story to share with us about writing from different cultural perspectives, as well as insights about the challenges he's had to overcome as an author in being a dyslexic writer. Kim, thank you so very much for being with us here today.
My pleasure.
Kim, could you tell us a bit about your background and how that has led you to writing?
Okay, I grew up in Modesto, and the early part of my childhood, we were very poor. A lot of times the dinner we had came from fishing the Tuolumne River. And so I understood what it was to be poor, and my father was an alcoholic to begin with. And after my mom had left him, he decided he'd no longer drink if she would come back. So anyway, he gave up drinking, came back, and within a short while, instead of every other week having a new job because he'd just get mad at the boss and quit or get fired, he opened a business. It was Don's Hancock, a local service station about 2 miles down the road here off of Paradise and Vernon. And since I was the kid that was a little slow, you might say, they decided it was probably a good idea that I learn a trade or a skill or at least some work ethics.
Okay.
So I started working there at age 9. And I'd go to school. After school, I'd go to work the service station, do my homework behind the counter and service cars and wait on customers. And during that time, we had a lot of hunters and fishermen had come through. They're all great storytellers, just had some of the funniest and greatest stories you'd ever want to hear. And then life lessons just kind of flow, the wisdom of the working man. A lot of the customers were from the Dust Bowl, so they'd seen harder times than I'd ever would have imagined, even growing up poor. And you'd listen to their stories, and they had such grace about them, about how they dealt with things, and nothing seemed to really throw them for a loop. You know, that's just today's problem. We'll figure it out and go to tomorrow's. You know, they had such a way of living.
It was almost an oral tradition you were hearing and listening to people.
It was an oral tradition. Then my grandmother was part Native American, and she dealt with things in a different fashion than most people. And again, oral traditions there with her brother, my Uncle Walter, showing up on a whim. He'd show up, and he was a hunter trapper for the federal government, but he also was a guide. So he'd show up, and here would come different wild meats. We'd have wild boar, we'd have bear or venison, or you know, whatever he happened to have on him, and everything would go into the pot, you might say, and we'd feast on this. And afterwards, my dessert was listening to these great stories he had to tell about, you know, he'd tell about the animal. The animal's life lives on through the story. Native Americans often would use the term to sing your song, meaning that when you pass, your memory is oral, and they would sing your song. So after having all these great stories and these experiences, my family, it was an e-ticket ride. It was fun. We did so many things. We eventually bought property up in the mountains, and so having this experience at a young age, both ends of the spectrum for at getting by and then having more things, I felt very privileged. And there's nothing that you meet in this world that you aren't supposed to have met. The experience you're supposed to have, no matter what it is. So you take it to a positive area instead of a negative. You're not a victim anymore.
How did you, I mean, what you're talking about is very inspiring. You see all of these people speaking, you hear these extraordinary stories. What about this made you say, at some point, I want to take this and turn it into a book? What motivated and inspired you to do that?
Well, I had wrote some small stories about things that happened, including what some would say a vision that happened one day hunting. But and I had to create a character for that one. I created a Japanese character to explain it to me. Most of the other characters are real characters or a combination of people that I have met, and the stories were real. The things that they talk, the lessons they talk about are real. So I had all this going for me, and like I say, I had these little things. Being dyslexic, I question everything that I wrote.
How come?
Everything I wrote in the past had a lot of red connected to it.
Okay, how do you mean?
Every teacher that you wrote anything for would circle all the mistakes in red.
Okay.
Pretty soon they might as well have just used a broad paintbrush and just...
Oh, Cam, how discouraging. How did you overcome that?
Two great teachers.
I mean, that would turn a lot of writers off to see all of that, especially because it wasn't your fault.
Two great teachers. One had inherited so much money at that time, she'd never have to work a day in her life, yet she continued to teach. The other, just a poor teacher. In the summertime, he worked at the local canneries in order to gain extra money. One taught me, I'm not going to use her name, it's in the book. Anyway, she was a third grade teacher, and she showed me science in a way that was very tactile, and you touched it, and it was physical, and it wasn't theoretical, and it was there that you could hold on to. And she taught me about predation through praying mantis. She'd gather the eggs around where she'd find them, and we had a cage with praying mantis in them.
Really?
And we would see what happens. And then we'd see them later on. We'd release a lot of the young ones and keep a few of the small. And then we'd see them lay eggs again. But she also had silkworms. We'd go out and gather mulberry leaves for them and feed them. Well, here's these ugly worms. They're not really pretty. Well, they kind of are, kind of opalescent, eating these green leaves. And then one day they spin a cocoon. And out of that cocoon comes a moth that's beautiful. And they call it metamorphosis. It doesn't mean what you start out as will be what you finish as. And we all go through that same phase, not so much changing physically, but we have a life that we lived when we were young, and then semi-adult and adult, get to, like me, being senior citizen. We go through all those stages of life, and they're all metamorphic changes that we... So anyway, Mr. Daly, on the other hand, knew that some of us couldn't read very well. He was an avid duck hunter. And me being a hunter and fisherman, I just hung on his words.
These sound like two incredibly inspiring teachers. How did they inspire you to ultimately go into writing?
Well, Mr. Daly, gave power to the words. Miss Foray opened me up to the science, and in doing so, it created a passion to learn more. And eventually, instead of getting on the bus, which since I was they had no word for dyslexia. They had, without a label on it, you were just a dumb kid. So I was sent part of the day on a bus across town, and the stigma that's attached to that. These teachers didn't attach any stigma, and they helped me.
When did you start writing? When did you begin working on Beneath Archer's Tree?
Oh, I started writing in the 80s, but it was just little short stories just things I could remember that I didn't want to lose. And that one, you want to call it an epiphany or vision, when it happened, I wanted to put it on paper. So I did that, and I stuck it in a drawer and hid it. And then one day, I was talking to my father just before he died. We knew he was at end stage. He was going to be with us very much longer. And one of the things he hated to go to a funeral of a friend. And he was at the age that a lot of his friends were dying. And we'd go to a funeral and he'd say, "Are we at the right place? Are you sure this is right? I don't know who this man's talking about. This is not my friend. My friend's never been to his church as far as I know. And all of a sudden, it's all about this man's church. It's a big advertisement to come to my church and find Jesus." And my dad would just make him angry. So I knew this. And I told him that when his time would come, I would sing his song. So down the road here, there's a church that we took my father's ashes to, and I sang his song, you might say. When I had finished telling his story, people come up and says, "Did anybody tape that? Does anybody did anybody use a video, or did anybody, any audio?" "No." "Well, where's your notes?" And I had a little piece of paper that had a couple notes. But it started out with, my first boss was an SOB. My dad liked that. He says, "Tell it like it is, son." "I'm an SOB." And then I said, "But Dad, SOB means special old boy."
Going along those lines, can you tell us a bit about Beneath Archer's Tree? What is the book? How did you organize and structure it and create this storytelling piece?
Well, see, after I talked about my dad, people asked me, "Can you please write that down for us?" So I wrote it down and I mailed it out to different peoples and relatives and stuff. And people got back to me and says, "You got any more of those stories?" "I got thousands of them. What do you want?" "Well, can you just send us a couple?" So I just started writing down some of the stories, and I had to go about it. I have a different approach to this writing thing altogether.
So? Can you talk about that?
Well, a lot of people go linear. This goes to here. My story is such that I created chapter headings before I ever wrote about them.
So were you plotting it out when you were doing that, or?
I'd write about this here, and people say, "Well, a lot of times you get writer's block." I says, "Yeah." Then I step over here and go, "Oh," and I pick up on this chapter and continue on. So writer's block was back here. Now I'm writing. And I did that, and I brought a lot of these stories and a lot of these, like I say, some of this wisdom. I even used it at work one day. Of course, they didn't know that I was dyslexic, but I was trained for everything in the building. And then they started training me to interview people for jobs.
Really?
So I'm going to be an interviewer. And there's several of us in this class. I don't know how much they paid this woman to teach us, but people started going, "Yeah, the last bunch we hired were really lazy." Well, they weren't at the beginning. And as soon as they got their probationary period in, they just fell apart. They're not worth having. And lazy this and lazy that, and it went on. Every other word was lazy. I kind of raised my hand. And the woman's teaching class. She goes, yes? I says, I don't know, but I think laziness is an oft-maligned and underrated skill. And she went into straight tilt. Like, what? I said, think about it. Some guy has 2 sticks, a hide, and everything they own sitting in the middle of that hide, and he's dragging it along. Some other guy says, I got this round flat thing. I get 2 of them, stick a stick between them, and I got an axle and a wheel. Now you got a hand cart. Somebody else come along and says, that's pretty neat. I got an animal I domesticated, and we'll put him out front. But now you got a horse cart. Somebody comes along after that and says, that's not nearly big enough. We'll add to it another set of wheels, and I got a wagon. Pretty soon they're going across, all over the world with wagons and hauling stuff. That's what a lazy person does. But then, somebody else come along and says, get rid of the horse, I got a motor, got a car. And some other set of idiots come along and says, if I get that going fast enough, put wings on it, I bet I can get it in the air. That's what lazy people do. They don't want to work hard. Hard workers are still dragging the sticks. The lazy people, the good lazy, there's a bad lazy too. The good lazy figure out ways to do it smarter, with less effort.
So that's what you're doing, seeing what you're doing with the book when you're going from chapter to chapter.
Chapter to chapter, I am flowing through it. I put that illustration in the book about one of my characters. So it creates something that most people don't think about anymore. There's parts of this book that were taught to me, life lessons, that aren't taught anymore. My grandmother was one of the best. She taught me, along with Mr. Daly and a few other people, about tolerance and about redemption and about making a difference in this world. The book itself is set up so that it is to pay back and pay forward.
And we'll be back after these messages.
Orient House, family owned and operated since 1983, offers an extensive menu of Chinese and Japanese cuisine. Voted Best Asian Restaurant by Modesto B. readers with 2 locations, 609 Tully Road across from MJC and 3318 McHenry Avenue across from Target. Be sure to try the daily lunch specials featuring garlic chicken or tempura. That's Orient House, great for dine-in or takeout.
And we're back with Kim Nicholson, author of Beneath Archer's Tree. What were some of the challenges you had to overcome as a writer to stay focused on creating this book and communicating all these stories that you put in it?
My biggest challenge was time.
How?
I was working 7 days a week, 12-hour days. One day I'd go in at 2 o'clock in the morning, get off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The next day I'd go in at 6 o'clock in the morning, get off at 7 o'clock at night. Sometimes I'd flop those every other day.
Well, how did you carve out the time to write then?
I'd put down 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there. I was working like that for 7 years.
So you actually you wrote this in snippets?
Yes.
How did you bring it all together? Because I've spoken with authors who have a similar situation in that they just don't have enough time to write, yet like yourself, they create these marvelous books. So here you got bits and pieces and scraps and crumbs. How did you weave it all together into stories?
It's cobbled together pretty easily, just because of the way the chapters work. And what it was, this starts out with I'm going to tell you right now, the main character in the book, you're looking at him. So
a bit of the autobiography.
I changed the name
to protect the innocent.
Well, I get embarrassed easy. I'm not one for limelight. I know I'm not going to get rich from this book, and I know I'm probably not going to get famous. Mm-hmm. But if I can make the difference in somebody's life who's made a difference in somebody else, most of the funds for this is probably going to go to nonprofits anyway. And it's set up so that nonprofits can utilize this book, sell it like they would cookie dough, and keep the $5 or whatever it is that's left over, because Barnes & Noble's selling it for $15. On the website, it's $10. Pre-sell it, you're out no money at all, and keep the difference for your nonprofit.
So you wrote it in a way as a charitable effort, educational, teaching, but also what people can use to help their organizations.
Sure. But your question again, how did I do it?
Yeah.
The main character, I have a ranch in the mountains, and somebody went into the barn, and as a relative, and some other people, their friends, and a lot of my memories that didn't mean much to anyone else. You know, we'd stored a lot of stuff in the barns, was gone through. Anything pretty much that had monetary value was sold. There in the dirt was an item. There's another item over there. Each one connected to a memory, tied there in the dirt. And as I sat down, I'm sitting at a table that used to be my grandmother's picnic table that was brought in. It became the kids' table at Thanksgiving and Christmas. So here I am, I'm sitting at a table that I sat at as a child, and I'm looking at stuff that started out as my childhood and went on into my adulthood, and it's tossed in the dirt as though it has no value. And that is how the book starts. And in that stuff, the memory that is connected becomes, you go through these emotions.
Oh,
You know, you're
extraordinary.
mad as you can be. You'd strangle somebody if they're close enough, and then you start toning it down and putting it in perspective, and really not, the other stuff that had monetary value doesn't have the value of what's in the dust.
How did you come up with the title, Beneath Archer's Tree?
That vision I had, let's say, happened while I was bow hunting one day.
Could you tell us about that?
I stalked a deer for over 4.5 hours.
Wow.
And at times standing still, 15-20 minutes at a time, on one leg sometimes. And I watched this day unfold. I watched it play with a young buck and a band of does, and the young buck was with the band of does, but they played tag, just like I've seen my horses do and I've seen goats do. They were playing tag, and I used all the skills I could. I got around the does. They were standing watch and laying down. The alpha doe was awake and aware, and I got past her, and the wind was perfect, and I worked my way in as close as that camera to the deer. He had laid down in some incense cedar saplings, and I was that close. And I looked at him, and I drew back my bow. Arrow knocked, cheeked. All I had to do was let it loose. I noticed his nostrils flare a little bit, and then his eyes move under his eyelids. He was in REM.
Okay.
And he was in his dream. And I could release the arrow and kill him in his dream, and he would never wake. And I let the bowstring relax, and I watched him for just a short while. And at 2 o'clock almost every day, on almost every mountain, the wind will change. Convection, the heat rising. It drew my scent up to the doe, and she comes stomping down the hill. She was mad. How'd you get past me? All of that. And then the deer got up, buck got up, everybody got up and left, and I walked back to the ranch. And as I was walking back to the ranch, something went through my hair like an arrow with a swoosh of a baseball bat. And it did that 3 times, and on the 3rd time I finally caught it. It was a falcon.
Really?
Flying, and it flipped my hair, and it would go over the side of the hill in such a way that past the brush and trees that I couldn't catch it because it's like somebody tapping you on this shoulder and, hey, how you doing? It did that, and it's happened to me before, but only when I was around their nests. Well, it had done that, and then when I got back to the ranch, I had this vision, and waking up under a tree, and the story from there goes on, most vivid colors, and I know it's about time.
Now, question for you. You've gone through a lot of personal experiences, how all of this added up and poured into making you into a writer. What advice do you have for other writers? You've gone through the process, you're a published author. People are always looking for ways to follow in your tracks. What advice and counsel would you give to writers?
Pay attention. A lot of people are sleepwalkers in this world. That's what I mean by waking the dormant eye of the hunter. Because they walk through life and they do not see what's there. Pay attention. Make mental notes and make physical notes if you have to. And then work with that. And one of the best advice, and it's going to sound gross, one of my friends, and I mentioned special thanks to Dallas Cole and Letha, he said somebody told him once, when you get to a spot and you can't do anything else, puke it out.
That's a visual, okay.
Throw it all out there on the paper, scrape this way, and you'll find that nugget to start with. And that will carry you off on a tangent whichever way it wants to go. But you just start, I don't care if it's a quick brown fox jumped over the sleeping dog, a red fox, whatever, you know. You just do that until, oh, wait a second, I got an idea. And then you take off with it. I really didn't start writing until I got a computer. I did write, I had a word processor, and it had some spell check capabilities. But before that, I'd write it and then hide it, So I started out with that word processor. Then I went to a computer, because my pen doesn't have spell check.
No.
I can get it in the ballpark and kind of figure out if I got the next one's right or wrong. And boy, can I misspell words. You just look at my Facebook page.
You're clearly a writer. Okay, I wanted to take a moment first to thank you so much for sharing your personal story and what has been involved in helping you create this marvelous book, Beneath Archer's Tree. And I would like to invite our guests, if you'd like to learn more about Kim Nicholson and his book, Beneath Archer's Tree, which shares stories from a cultural perspective, please visit the KAZV TV website to learn more about him and his book and where to find it. Kim, we have a tradition here on the show where at the conclusion of the interview, we invite you to pull the pineapple. Now, that probably sounds a little odd, but what we'd like you to do is pull that pineapple out and add your book to our collection of authors who have joined us on the show.
Oh, okay.
And we are delighted to have you join us this way, and I'm sure I'll have you back on the show. I do have one last question for you.
Yes.
Do you anticipate any more books in the future?
Now, see, that is something that I've mulled around, but I'm looking at how much time I have left. I don't know how much time I have left anymore. And I feel that this might be it, but I tell you what, anybody's got any questions, hit me on Facebook. I'm there. I'm just Kim Nicholson. Look me up. I'm looking for anybody, everybody. You got questions about writing.
Or you want to go duck hunting.
Or duck hunting or pheasant hunting. I go fishing too. But just look me up. I'm easy to find. You see my truck around town. It's an old beater with my sign on the back, Beneath Archer's Tree. Pull me over. We'll talk. I'm easy. I'm probably one of the most approachable people you'll ever meet.
That's wonderful. Kim, thank you so very much today, and delighted to have you as a guest on our show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is totally cool.